Thank you very much, Ricardo. Thank you, everybody. Okay, I have half an hour to explain to you everything you wanted to know about free will. I will be fast. Okay, one question is we and they. So what are they? There are people that think that we are irreducibly, categorically different from other species or from, in principle, from any machines that can be built. So what is, according to these people, the human trait that is unique to us? According to some, is self-consciousness, as we saw, consciousness itself, intentionality, emotions, language, creativity, morality, free will, perhaps more. I think that, I'd leave aside free will. All the others, I think, there is no any good argument to prove that in principle a mechanical entity cannot have these features. And in some cases, we also already know positively that the animals have some of these, at least at some degree. So free will is one of the main topics of this discussion. Is free will what makes us different? That's my question. Different from both animals and the machines. Possible machines, not the concrete machines, even in principle, okay? So, some definitions. What is free will? There are a lot of definitions out there, so I give it two that I think are more or less common. Is our or one's capacity to causally contribute to the making of one's choices and actions. That's kind of neutral across the spectrum of the possible views. Oh, I can use this, right? Yeah. And then there is another definition I use. That's important. It's the capacity that whatever it is, and if we have it, is the capacity that grounds the possibility to choose and act morally or immorally, okay? You act immorally if you have free will. Otherwise, you act amorally, without any connection with morality. So little children can do bad things, but they are not immoral. Okay, this is the definition. There are two different, more or less, there are several conditions of free will that people have presented, but two are almost universally accepted. We need to have alternative possibilities in front of us when we choose and act freely. If we only have one possibility, people think that it's impossible to choose freely. This is debated what it means exactly, but let's take it as it is now, and then we'll discuss it a little more. And then the second one is that among these possible alternatives that are in front of the agent, or the free agent, the choice is made with the causal contribution of the agent herself, okay? So it's not that I have different options and I flip the coin. It's me that have to contribute to the causal choice here, or to the determination of what I'll do. These are the two conditions. Now, the problem is that, first, because this is a conference on consciousness, what is the relationship about these two things or features? There is, of course, a very important overlapping, but there can be, we can be conscious without being free to being able to act freely. That's what I wanted to write. So you may be conscious, for example, if you are locked in, but you cannot act freely, or you can be conscious when there are pathologies, so everybody can experience that, you feel you are acted upon. So you are conscious, but you are not free in those moments. So you can have consciousness without free will. And another one is this. You may act freely without being conscious. This is very important, but we have to be careful. So, for example, I can go out of my place, take the keys, put them in my pockets, go out and ask, did I take the keys? Of course, I did it voluntarily. It was an act of free will, but I wasn't conscious. This happens because it's a habit I have, so I don't have to be conscious every time I do that action. But in order to be free, at some point in the past, I had to be conscious when I did this. The first times I go out of my place, I had to pay attention to take the keys with me. So there are situations in which I may act freely without being conscious, but at some point in the past, that action has to be determined in a way that I was conscious of, okay? So there is nothing like freedom without a consciousness entirely. You need consciousness at some point, at least in the past, for being free. Okay, that's the crux of the problem. In the typical way of, presenting the problem. So determinism is the idea that each event is determined by previous events and the laws of nature, according to something like that. This is just for the most perverse of you, but it means exactly what is written above. And indeterminism is the idea that determinism is false. Now, this has to be qualified in some ways because we are interested in actions, so really we care about if we are determined or not when we act. So if there is an indeterministic event on Alpha Centauri, the universe is indeterministic, but this is irrelevant for the issue of free will. So we want to talk about if we are determined or not. So this is our intuition of free will, the simple common sense intuition. The past is given, we cannot change it. The future is open, at least two alternatives, that's intuition. And then this is where there is the circle there with a line. This is the present, when we contribute to the choice. It's not just us that you need other conditions, but we contribute to the causally to the choice of A or B, okay? That's the idea. That's the intuition. Well, if the universe is deterministic, this seems to be the intuition. There is no open future. Everything is determined because the past is entirely determined, the future is entirely determined by the past according to the laws of nature. So where are the alternative possibilities here? So I told you that you need two conditions for free will, alternative possibilities and self-determination. At least the alternative possibilities here seem to disappear. And what about the indeterministic universe? Here seems more plausible, right? At least at first sight. This is what probably Professor Penrose will appeal to in his talk. The idea is that the past is given, but the future is open. People now think about quantum indeterminacy, at least in the interpretations of quantum mechanics that are indeterministic, that are not them all, but many are. So according to this view, there is some indeterminism we can appeal to when we think of the issue of free will. So the idea is that at the moment of choice, there is an indeterministic event in the brain somewhere, and there are different theories we'll see with Penrose about where this happens. And, well, this gives us the open future. That's the idea. However, I have to say that the vast majority of people who discuss free will are not very happy with this. There are important people who defend this idea. John Searle is one, Roger Penrose is another one, and others, but the problem is this. As David Hume used to say, this is really randomness. So what happens in the brain, the indeterministic event in the brain that is, according to some, is a magnification of indeterministic quantum indeterminism, well, that kind of indeterminism makes things such that we do not control what happens. So in the same exact situation, I could choose A or B because it's not me that chooses, but is the indeterministic event in the brain. Of course, there is a spectrum of probabilities, blah, 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 but it's not me that makes the difference. So the idea here is that with indeterminism, according to many, with indeterminism, the freedom actually collapses to randomness. Okay? Not pure chance, because we talk about probabilities, but randomness. And that seems very far away from freedom. These are the challenges, okay? Well, these are the four main conceptions of freedom on the market nowadays. One is libertarianism. This is Roger Penrose defends this. Kant used it to defend this, and many others. So this idea that free will presupposes indeterminism, as I just said. Then there is the other one that is the most common it's very implausible at first sight, but it's the most common among philosophers, experts in the field. So the idea that free will is compatible with determinism. I will say a little more about that. Then there are two negative views. The first one is illusionism. This is skeptic about the reality of free will. Free will is not real. This is very much common nowadays among philosophers and scientists. And then there is Mysterianism that has been advocated by Noam Chomsky and others. We as a species are not smart enough to solve the problems. We don't understand exactly what free will is, and we don't know how to prove that we have it. You know how it works with Chomsky? Chomsky thinks that if he cannot prove it, our species, that's what he writes, our species cannot prove it in general, even in, 2 million years. But it's on the market there. People that say, surrender, we don't understand. So these are the four views. The two main positive views are libertarian free will, that have this problem of determination. How can I determine what happens if what happens depends on an event I do not control, an indeterministic event in the brain, for example, that I do not control. I cannot exercise any control over the indeterministic events in my brain, microtubules or wherever, okay? That's the challenge. This view is unpopular, but it's not, there are people who defend it. I sympathize more, this is an article I wrote with Hilary Putnam, a well-known philosopher. Hilary used to defend the idea that free will can be rooted in the quantum mechanics indeterminism. Then he changed his mind, and we wrote this article together. The idea is that he thought there could be some kind of a holism in the indeterminism that derives from quantum mechanics. It's not only local. There is some magnification of the indeterminism that we can control in some way. But then he realized that the use he was doing of the uncertainty principle was a little sloppy because he was slipping, going from an epistemological interpretation of the uncertainty principle to an ontological one, depending on the interpretations of free will. Of the quantum mechanics. So, for example, the Copenhagen interpretation that was very famous until a couple of decades ago, 3 decades ago, has an epistemological interpretation of the uncertainty principle. That's not enough for free will. It's not an epistemological question. It's an ontological question. Indeterminism has to be out there. But if you take the realist interpretations of indeterminism there, the uncertainty principles like the Girardi-Rimini-Weber or Bohmian interpretation of quantum mechanics, they are not good enough either, because one is the Girardi-Rimini-Weber is indeterminism is strictly local, is not holistic, it's only at the level of the subatomic particles, so we cannot do anything about that. And the Bohmian interpretation, as you know, is deterministic, so we don't have the kind of indeterminism that Hilary was looking for. So finally, we have defended this article in which we criticize libertarianism and we wanted to defend compatibilism, but then he passed away, so we couldn't do much about the second part of the article. Anyway, let me say something about this very quick. The idea here is that what is missing here is the alternative possibilities, right? So if the world is deterministic, there are no alternative possibilities. Where are my choices here? It seems that I have to do what is determined already. Well, there is a famous interpretation that says, well, in some sense, there are alternative possibilities. In the sense it's this. If I wanted to do differently, I could do differently. If I go to a restaurant and they say, look, we have pasta alla norma or melanzane in parmigiana, what do you want? I say, I want pasta alla norma, and they say, I'm sorry, you were determined, so you are not free. I could reply, what do you mean I'm not free? I wanted pasta alla norma, and I asked for pasta alla norma. Using Daniel Dennett famous phrase, this is all is worth wanting of the idea of free will. To do what you want to do, even if your will is determined. Everything is determined in this view, so why not my will? The important thing is that is my will, not someone else's will. If I wanted to order something else, I would, but that's not the case. Of course I wanted that because of reasons I had for that. So I cannot, of course, in this short time, I cannot say much more. But this is the most common positive view of free will, the idea that the important thing is to do what you want to do. What is free here is not really the will. It's more the action, if it's causally caused by my will, or by my intentions, or by my desires, by my reasons, and whatever. The important is that my conscious will at some point contributes causally to the decision that will bring about the action. That's compatible with free will. Well, there are a couple of reasons why people tend to be critical of this. One is the famous experiments in the tradition of Libet. This is probably the most discussed recent example of this. An article appeared in Nature Neuroscience, Unconscious Determinants of Free Decisions in the Human Brain, where unconscious means unconscious in the sense of cognitive unconscious, not Freudian unconscious that you go 30 years to the psychoanalyst and then it comes back to consciousness. That's not the kind of unconscious we are talking. We are talking about neural events. So the idea is that everything we do and we think is free is actually determined by the unconscious events. There are a lot of problems with these experiments. I don't have time to enter in this, but notice that if you are a compatibilist, you don't care. That's perfectly fine. The idea that what you decide is determined by unconscious events is perfectly fine for a compatibilist. Everything is determined, so why not my decisions? Okay? So many people, especially in science, like this guy that is very popular, Sam Harris, has written a famous book against free will based on this idea that we are determined, so we cannot be free. That's just a bad way of arguing. You have to prove that compatibilism is wrong. And this is a much more complicated idea. So there is nothing presently from neuroscience that proves in any way that we are not free, if you accept compatibilism. Another argument that's more intriguing is this idea that the conscious will never participates in the causal determination of our actions. So the conscious will only comes afterwards. It intervenes when we have to justify or explain what we have done, to others or to ourselves. That's the idea. There are interesting arguments here, but here, this is an interesting challenge. If it was correct, free will would go bananas. If it was true that all our choices are made unconsciously, and the conscious will only intervenes afterwards, it's a fictitious creature that we invent to justify what we have unconsciously determined, well, there wouldn't be any free will. The point is that these are a very narrow set of important examples, but it cannot be generalized to the real important cases here. That are the cases in which we deliberate, we ponder, we think about what to do. These are the interesting cases of the exercise of free will. What is important for morality? You have to make a decision that affects other people. You think about it. There are no evidence that this kind of decisions are made unconsciously when you really think about it. Okay, so I don't think there are good experimental now ideas to prove that there is no free will. Of course, these are very important to prove that our consciousness is much more opaque than we would like to think. But it doesn't affect free will. Remember, free will exists if at least some time we can exercise it. And there is no argument to say that we cannot exercise free will sometime at least, when we ponder about what we do. So going back here, it seems that there is an hope about free will. And this compatibilism. We may be determined. Who cares? Everything is. But if we act in a way in which our conscious mind is causally relevant for what we do, that's enough for free will. It's enough for the attribution of responsibility. And so, we and them, again, let's look at this now. This would be us, right? When people say humans are special, they take him or a few others. They don't take us or normal people. So, and they take a regular chimp and perhaps a machine. And then, what about free will? It works that way. If you take free will in the old dualistic way, like a neo-Cartesian way. So it's a property of a disembodied mind, and then could make special, but we don't have any evidence that this is the case. I don't think this is the correct view of free will. So that's not something that we should consider. There is no, science has debunked this view. So there are two possibilities here. Either we don't have free will, as some people argue, with some arguments I don't think they are convincing, but it may be possible. But if we don't have free will, certainly we are not different from the others because of free will, because that's not, wouldn't be the case. If we have compatibilist free will, however, there is no reason at all in principle for which machines cannot have it at some point. Because remember, you can be determined as long as your conscious mind at some point determines what you do. So if we are able to give machines a conscious mind, we cannot a priori say that the entity won't ever have the capacity of exercising free will. And what about the chimps and the other apes and some other mammals, perhaps not just mammals? I think that free will actually comes in degrees. Think about the child. A 2-year child or 1-year child doesn't have free will, but then progressively the child is more able to control what they do, to think about the consequences of what they do. It's not a all or nothing process. So at some point, slowly, the child acquires the capacity to exercise free will. So I think the chimps have some of this capacity. So they have some free will, not the full free will that a fully rational person would have. But yes, I think there is a sense in which some free will and even some morality can be attributed to chimps. So is free will the notion that differentiates us from animals, at least some of them, and machines? My answer is no. Thank you very much.